and welcome to the MMA India Show. This is your host, Parvin Dabas and Akhilesh Gannavarapu. And we are previewing UFC Fight Night Fortaleza. Sorry, we are doing a post-fight analysis of Fortaleza, UFC Fight Night Fortaleza. And we will do a preview of UFC London, which is happening on March 18th. India, March 19th in the morning sometime here. We'll check the timings and announce it. Now, first things first, we will talk about Alex Oliveira and Tim Means. Of course, this is a rematch, so to speak, because their last fight was a no contest. And, you know, that's why they wanted to take this one back. And it was a really interesting fight. You want to tell them a little about it, Akhilesh?
Yeah, so, going into the fight, it was pretty clear. Alex Oliveira knows that he had to evade Tim Means' elbows. Means is a very dangerous fighter in clinches where he throws his short elbows, while Oliveira's biggest strength was his jiu-jitsu, was the way he could effectively nullify Means' offense on the ground and use his jiu-jitsu and submit him. So the other thing that people wanted to see was how Oliveira would exploit his strength once again in the clinches. And, Oliveira, although he used to fight at 155, the last time he missed weight, I think he came down at about 159 or something, then he had to move to welterweight. So, it was basically down to seeing how Oliveira would, kind of negate Tim Means' strengths in those clinches with those short elbows and the manner in which Tim Means was he's a very dangerous fighter in the sense that he always stays behind his jabs, extends his hand. He never commits. He never comes in completely forward. So he's a very intelligent fighter. While at the same time, Oliveira might not be the best of strikers, but he has very dangerous submission game. So we saw that essentially the same thing play out. We saw Oliveira using his strength, using his muscle conditioning to essentially push Means against the fence. Even after the first round, he had Means' cornerman telling him to get his back off the fence. So that was a well thought out plan by Oliveira. Then in the second round, he effectively took him to the ground and finished him with a rear naked choke.
Yeah, now that puts Alex Oliveira, of course, back on track. I think before this, he lost to he had a controversial win over Will Brooks, of course, and before that, he had lost to Donald Cowboy Cerrone, I think. Yeah.
So his fight against Will Brooks, I really did not. I think we talked about it after the fight as well.
We did. We did a pretty extensive chat about it.
Yeah, so Oliveira came in overweight. That was that card where I think 4 or 3 fighters came overweight from Brazil.
Yeah.
So, Will Brooks, a top prospect, former Bellator champion, came into the UFC with a hot streak, was touted to be the next champion in the lightweight division. Kind of, lost that momentum in his fight with Oliveira. So now with that win, Oliveira can restore his credibility back, sort of. And it'll be interesting to see who he faces next in the welterweight division.
Yeah, because he is a good fighter,
Yeah.
And he's proved that, of course, with this win here. Now, the next fight, of course, Beth Correa, Marion Reneau. Really interesting fight. I'm always surprised by Beth Correa because she has decent boxing skills, but she seems very flat-footed. But she seems to pull, these combinations out of nowhere. And she's like a grinder. She stays in the fight. Even her win over Jessica Ai, though I personally didn't think she won. We spoke about this.
Yeah.
But, again, she hung in there all the time. Even here against Marion Reneau, she kind of hung in there, and she gets her combinations in. Marion Reneau, of course, especially in the last round in the end, Beth Correa survived, and she immediately, of course, got up and started doing her little dance. I think that was for the judges' benefit. But I think a draw was, of course, fair, so to speak.
Right. So basically, you had someone saying Betch has evolved in her twerking, not in a stand-up game. So we kind of saw that on display this time around as well. Because, yeah, as you said, in the first and second round, I thought Bitch, had the upper hand easily in the striking department because Renault is primarily a grappler. She has very good grappling, but in the stand-up department, she isn't all that great because even in her last fight, she barely cruised. So, Bitch, however, has good boxing. We talked about her fight with Ronda Rousey and how Ronda made Ronda look like an elite boxer. So, we can't say that Bitch is an excellent striker as well. She has a lot of holes, of course, in a stand-up game, but I cannot think of anyone in the bantamweight division that has that knockout power in the women's bantamweight division. So, yeah, I mean, obviously in the first and second round you had Bitch putting in her combinations, but as you said, she was left flat-footed on so many occasions, which gave Renault the opportunity to counter at will almost. Now the only thing that saved Bitch at that point is because Renault is not renowned for her striking. I think that's the only thing that kind of gave the first and second round to Bitch go, hey, going into the third round, that was where Bitch started aggressively. I remember, tagged Renault, but once Renault took Bitch to the ground, she had no answer. Of course, Bitch, she tried getting up, she tried taking Renault taking Renault to the ground for some reason. But in the first and second round, you had Bitch again, going for the takedown. So she had a plan. Her plan was, to keep the fight mostly on the feet and then try and take Renault to the ground and kind of negate any offense. But once Renault transitioned and got Bitch's back, that was where Bitch had to just hang on, and she did. But that was an easy 10-8 round. It was an easy 10-8 round.
Now, of course, almost you can say this was the fight of the night, Edson Barboza versus Benail Dariush.
Right.
Of course, everything was about that knee. He connected that knee with great timing. Before that, I felt Benail Dariush was, doing much better than I thought he would.
Yeah, so it was interesting because that was another fight where, essentially, Edson Barboza is renowned for his Muay Thai. We talked about this during the preview as well. He's renowned for his Muay Thai. He's renowned in the lightweight division for his kicks as well. Now, the only thing that we also talked about was how Barboza would fare on the ground against someone like, Benail Dariush, who's obviously a black belt in BJJ. Now, we also talked about how, under Ricardo Almeida, you had Edson Barboza who has come leaps and bounds, has improved leaps and bounds in his grappling as well. But I was very much countering at will. So what happened was Barboza, while he threw his combinations, once he threw his combinations and one he had to read that, he was left stranded. He was almost stationary at that point. Once he threw a combination, he was stationary for a couple of seconds, and once again got into motion, started moving and landing his combination. So Dariush exploited that. He figured out that it takes some time for Edson Barboza to transition between his combinations. So that was where I was very impressed with how Dariush went about with his game plan. But we knew that in the second round Dariush would go for a takedown, try to take the fight to the ground where he is he has a bigger advantage. Now Edson scouted that. He saw Dariush changing levels, and once he went to the ground, it was almost that Joel Romero, Chris Weidman kind of a deal where he telegraphed the level change and then just struck him with a flying knee.
Yeah, which of course put the lights out on Benail, and Edson. Now I think he called out Tony Ferguson again, who beat him. I think was it 2016 or 2015? I think that he beat him.
It was 2015.
I remember. So anyway, that was a great fight because I remember it as well. And he has, of course, improved since then. But I think I don't see Tony Ferguson being really interested in that matchup because Tony Ferguson is not now calling out, of course, Nate Diaz. And he doesn't want to go back. He doesn't care. He has a win over him. So why he wouldn't be really interested in making that matchup again, I think.
Yeah, I mean, against someone like Edson Barboza, it's a legit top 5 contender. So, we know Tony is really good in striking, has great conditioning, has great cardio. But at the same time, Barboza, as you said, has improved by leaps and bounds. And again, as I said, under Ricardo Almeida, his grappling has improved tremendously as well. So, yeah, I mean, a fight between Tony and Barboza might make sense for Barboza, but it really does not do anything for Tony Ferguson, because Tony Ferguson has already beaten him. He's the number 2 ranked contender in the lightweight division.
Yeah.
The realistic fight that makes more sense for Tony at this point is either a Conor McGregor showdown or with Nate Diaz. As you said, that's the money fight for him.
Yeah. Now, Shogun Rhea versus Gian Villante. Of course, Shogun seemed very strong throughout this fight, you know, and seemed pretty determined. And he's on a good win streak now. I think it's this is his 3rd win in a row now.
3rd.
Yeah. So, but he has said he's practical enough to know that a title shot is not really one fight away. But he is looking at, you know, something down the line. You know, pretty steady stand-up game he had. And, you know, you want to say something about the fight?
Yeah, so this kind of reminded me about the old Pride Shogun. Because, you know, in those Pride days, he was known for his amazing boxing. You know, just the way he could put his opponent's lights out. So, you know, the thing that impressed me was Gian Villante. Although it's a light heavyweight fight, but Gian is a big guy for 205. He cuts a lot of weight to come down to 205. He has a massive frame, and you could see during the exchanges between both of them, Gian was considerably much bigger. Now, there was also this one point in the first round, if I remember correctly, where Shogun really rocked Gian. That's what that was about in the 2nd or 3rd minute of it. But in the 2nd round, you know, Villante also managed to rock Shogun. So it was a very interesting back and forth fight where both were really good on the feet, and no one really necessarily, you know, wanted to take the fight to the ground because they had enough confidence in their stand-up. But again, just at the beginning of the 3rd round, Shogun just came in with those flurry of combinations where he connected with the head kick and then moved in for.
I think we've lost Akhilesh or something is on. We'll be right back. We'll fix this problem and come right back. And we're back. Either Akhilesh or our system had some problem, but we're back. So, yeah, so Gian has to cut a lot of weight, but Shogun was on point and he, you know, stopped it. And he looked, like you said, the Shogun of old.
Yeah, you know, we talked about this during the preview as well, where we said with a dominant victory against Gian Villante and probably 2 more fights, 2 more wins after this, you could make a case for Shogun fighting for the title, because realistically in the light heavyweight division, you do not have anyone other than Glover Teixeira, Gustafsson who are fighting now. Then you have Daniel Cormier and Anthony Johnson who are going to fight at 210.
You know what I would want to see now? Is I would want to see Shogun versus Gustafsson.
Yeah, that would actually be a good matchup for both. Now, but the only thing is, Gustafsson has significant reach advantage over like Shogun now. So that might be the only problem. What I would rather want to see is Shogun against Jared Cannonier, because Cannonier came down to the light heavyweight division with a lot of momentum, touted as the next prospect in the light heavyweight division.
But didn't he just lose?
He lost, yes.
Yeah, he just lost. So why, I mean, but he doesn't need another easy fight. He needs a harder fight now.
Yeah, but Cannonier is really, really talented. So this could work in both ways. With a win over, you know, Cannonier, who I do not really, I don't think he's still ranked in the light heavyweight division, but against a top prospect in Cannonier, if Shogun manages to win, then you could potentially give him one more fight with one top 5 guy, probably, you know, the winner of Glover Teixeira and Gustafsson, while you have John Jones, who's going to be back later this year. So we need to keep that in consideration. So I think one fight against Cannonier, and probably if he wins, one more fight against a top 5 guy, and you could probably see Shogun fighting for the title again. So I think that would realistically be what UFC is looking at, because if they want to go back to Brazil, who is a bigger name than Shogun fighting for the title in Brazil?
Yeah, so but the reason I say Gustafsson is because Gustafsson has a fight coming up, right?
Yeah, he's going to fight Teixeira,
which I think Gustafsson will win. Let's say he wins. You know, let's say he wins. Right. Then let's say Shogun is 2 fights away, right?
Right.
First of all, he fights Gustafsson. Then the winner of that would have to fight the loser of Daniel Cormier, Anthony Johnson, to be the #1 contender then.
That would, either Cormier or Johnson is a very bad matchup for sure.
It is. But if you want to fight for the title, then you got to get through the loser of that.
Yeah, but again, I'm just looking at what would make sense for UFC if they're going back to Brazil, because they would not want to match up a legend in Shogun against, God forbid, Anthony Johnson, because that would be for, that would make a very bad fight.
But that's if Anthony Johnson loses.
Yeah, I mean, if it's even Daniel Cormier is going to just, take Shogun to the ground and wrestle him.
Yeah, but you can't fight a Jared Cannonier and then expect, with all due respect to Jared Cannonier, he's a good fighter. I'm not saying anything, but I'm just saying he's not the one fight away from the title fight.
Yeah, but
you can't fight him and then expect a title fight. You would need a very tough opponent.
Right. So as I said, maybe Teixeira or maybe Anthony Johnson would be better opponents than Daniel Cormier or Anthony Johnson.
You just said Anthony Johnson or a Glover Teixeira.
Or a Glover Teixeira. Either way.
That's what I'm saying as well. Because Anthony Johnson, depending on if he wins or loses against Daniel Cormier or a Daniel Cormier, of course. But if you want to fight for the title, you have to get through one of these guys.
Yeah, one of these guys. Yeah.
Anyway, so good things happening for Shogun. Now the title fight, of course, the main card, not title fight, was Vitor Belfort versus Kevin Gastelum, of course. Now, this kid, this guy's just been getting better and better, with every fight. Even though, of course, Vitor, and we've spoken about this, is not what he used to be. He's not the guy to beat. So it's not like, but people are using him still as a stepping stone.
Exactly. And this fight was your proverbial Vitor Belfort fight, because we even talked about this. Vitor is aggressive in the first minute, then fades as his opponent gets aggressive, pushes him to the back, and if it's a wrestler, that would be a bad matchup for Vitor going into the second round. We saw that with Gegard Mousasi. We've seen that with Chris Weidman against Belfort. Now we have seen it again with Kelvin Gastelum. So, we kind of called it. We said first minute Vitor will be aggressive, will come out swinging. Then as the fight progresses and as Kelvin, pressures Belfort and pushes him against the cage, and the moment it hits the mat, it's going to be Kelvin Gastelum that comes out with the victory. Now the same thing happened. You saw Belfort coming out strong, aggressive, pushing Kelvin, on the back foot. But once Gastelum was comfortable and once Vitor was again, the guy that was, being pushed against the fence, then Kevin, we've talked about his evolution as a striker as well. The way he, puts in his combinations, he has become a better boxer over the past couple of years. So Kelvin tagged Belfort. Belfort went to the ground and just Gastelum finished him. So it was your how do I say this, vintage Belfort fight.
Yeah. And that makes it 3 losses in a row for him. So he has said that his next fight is going to be his last fight.
Yeah.
Which, we think it should be. He's had a great career. But it is time, to end it. He has, of course, called for a League of Champions, I think, league, right?
League of Legends, yes.
League of Legends,
What I would rather see Belfort do is, fight his contract out, then get back on TRTs and go back to Ryzen. Because you have Miko Krokop who went to Ryzen, got back on his happy pills, who looked phenomenal, looked like the Krokop of old. So I would, although this isn't fair, I would want to see Belfort get back on TRT and go to Ryzen. He'll get the money, he'll get his big payday, we'll get to see old Vitor back. Win-win situation for both of us.
But what's the use of seeing a Vitor, a juiced up Vitor on TRT? It's not really,
Yeah, but that's the fun.
Oh, okay.
So that's the fun.
Okay, great. I just hope nobody quotes you on this now afterwards. So, but I want to know what those happy pills are. But now Kelvin Gastelum, of course, has called out Anderson Silva. It seems everybody is calling out Anderson Silva nowadays. So has Yoel Romero.
Right.
It's I almost find it a little demeaning to Anderson Silva. People get you've got a couple of wins. Hey, Anderson ko leke aao, Anderson se lagao bhai. Anderson Silva tu aaja samne. The guy's a legend.
It's almost because Anderson Silva dominated the middleweight division since 2007.
Yeah, but now people feel he's the guy to beat. I mean, as in he is the beatable guy rather. Everybody wants. It's like Vitor, in a way. They all feel they can beat him, and beating him is like that notch in the belt that they want.
Right, exactly. So, if I was a fighter in the middleweight division, if I was a guy making a run for the title, who would I want to fight? I wouldn't want to fight, Yoel Romero. I wouldn't want to fight Jacare Souza. I wouldn't want to fight Rockhold. Rockhold still is a very tough opponent. Same with Chris Weidman. So, who is the guy that I would want to fight to make a name for myself? Obviously, it's Anderson Silva. He's not the same Anderson that he was 4 years ago back in 2013
Obviously,
when he was still a champion.
He's 41 years old now.
Yeah, and that kind of shows. His movement is slacky. Is not. We've seen against Derek Brunson where Anderson was not the same evasive fighter that he once was, elusive fighter that he once was. Brunson tagged him. Anderson counted on his chin, but was he anything close to who he was 4 years ago? The honest answer would be no. So if I was a fighter in the middleweight division, I would see Anderson Silva as my next stepping stone, per se, as you said. I would want to get through Anderson Silva. I want to get a win against, arguably the greatest of all time. And then say, hey, look, I just beat Anderson. Give me a top 3, top 4 guy, and then let me fight for the title. So I think that's a smart move on Gastelum's part. But I don't think Anderson Silva is going to take the bait. I'm pretty sure Anderson Silva has said in his eyes set on either a fight with Nick Diaz, probably, who's...
what Anderson Silva has said is he wants to fight either Nick Diaz or Michael Bisping after his fight with GSP.
Right, so those are the two realistically good fights for Anderson. Either ways, he's going to make a big payday.
Yeah.
So, might as well do it.
Yeah. Well, that's it for UFC Fortaleza. Now coming to UFC London, the fight which is this weekend. Now, of course, Brad Pickett is fighting his last fight, and Vera is a last minute. Who was he supposed to fight before Vera came in?
Sorry?
Who was Pickett fighting before Vera came in?
Henry Briones.
Yeah. So Vera came in last minute because Henry got injured, and it's great that they were able to find a replacement because this was Pickett's farewell fight in front of his home audience. And now Pickett's a great fighter, and he's just had some bad luck in his last 2 fights. He's had losses over Uriah Faber and Yuri Alcantara, and he's had a win over Francisco Rivera, and before that he had 3 losses in a row.
Yeah, so Pickett, is one of what we say about Uriah Faber in the United States. Pickett is an equivalent in the United Kingdom because he has been there for so long.
Yeah.
But the thing is, in the UFC, I think he had about 5 wins, not more than that. So, you have someone who is primarily from a boxing background, coming, so the way in which the sport has evolved in the past few years, you have seen a lot of well-rounded fighters, especially in the lower divisions. If we talk about flyweights or bantamweights, you have seen fighters with a well-rounded skill set in the past 6-7 years. So I think it's a little sad for Pickett that he came to the UFC at a time where these fighters were all evolving, and we've seen even in his last fight against Uriah Faber, where Faber again has excellent takedowns, very good takedown defense as well, and is really solid in his boxing. While Pickett, he's primarily known as a boxer. He's a veteran, he is a legend, but I don't think he has that well-rounded skill set that the other fighters possess. For example, again, as you said, Alcantara is a submission specialist. We have seen recently, on the prelims card where Alcantara pulled out, I think it was a knee bar or a heel hook out of nowhere. So the thing is, he has faced people that were more evolved than him in the fight game. And the second thing, Pickett is probably in the same category as Ian McCall, where they kind of said, hey, so this is going to be my last fight, and that had to be rescheduled, and either the opponents backed out, or so these things do happen. But Pickett is finally going to fight his last fight in London, his hometown, in his home country. So it's a special moment for him. But again, he's going up against someone who's probably one of the best upcoming submission specialists. Right, so it's going to be a tricky fight. I mean, you have the proverbial striker versus grappler fight once again, and you know, I would want to see Piquet go out on a high, but it's going to be a tough fight for him nonetheless.
Yeah, well, all the best to him. Now, the next fight, of course, which we're going to talk about is Gunnar Nelson versus Alan Jouban. Now, Gunnar Nelson in his last 4 fights has 2 wins, 2 losses. He's got wins over Albert Tumenov and Brandon Thatch, and he's got losses against Damian Maia and Rick Story. Now, the fight against Damian Maia was just amazing. I mean, 2 jiu-jitsu guys, you know, adding with each other. It was just so technical and amazing to watch. And, of course, Damian Maia got the better of him, you know, but that was like a jiu-jitsu guy's dream come true to watch that fight. You know? So, and Alan Jouban, of course, coming off a really good victory over Mike Perry. You know, because Mike Perry is an aggressive guy who just keeps coming forward. But Alan Jouban had a really good game plan for him. And he, of course, before that, he has wins over Bilal Muhammad and Brandon O'Reilly as well. So he's on a 3-fight win streak, and he's shown that he still has it, though. He's been around for some time. Great looking guy, but he's still got it. You know, and I think this is a good matchup, you know, in Alan Jouban, who's got a great stand-up game against Gunnar Nelson, who is going to, of course, want to drag him to the ground like any jiu-jitsu guy wants and wrap over him like an anaconda. You know, Gunnar Nelson is just going to wait to get his claws in and drag him down. So that's why this is a really great fight. And I was really impressed with the way Alan fought against Mike Perry. You know, because that guy's aggressive. He just keeps coming forward and forward. But like I said, he had a great game plan for him. So, you know, it's obvious he's a thinking fighter. He's going to have a game plan for Gunnar. He's going to know, of course. They both know what they're going to do. You know, that's what's so interesting in these type of fights and matchups is you know what the other guy is trying to do. You know? But of course, you know, you've got these game plans on how to avoid it. And vice versa. You know, they both have... You know, it's like, you know, God has given both the predator and prey, you know, weapons to defend themselves. But here, they are both predator and prey at different times. You know, and they both have developed these weapons of defense and offense to deal with the others, you know, offense and defense as well. So that, I think, is what is really amazing, is this whole, the chess game that these guys play with each other, you know. And it's just that one wrong move that happens that changes the fate of a game like this, or the fate of a fight like this.
Right. So, you know, as you said, Gunnar Nelson has amazing background in Jiu-Jitsu. I think he won the ADCC World Championships back in 2010, 9. Anyway, so quite a long time ago. He is one of the most, you know, offensive grapplers in the welterweight division. We've talked, you know, you talked about his fight with Damian Maia. Maia is known for his amazing jiu-jitsu, just not only because of his offensive jiu-jitsu from the top position, top control, but also because how effective he is on his back. Yeah. Now, Gunnar Nelson is also a same kind of a fighter who is very dangerous, either, you know, on the top or of his back. So their fight inherently itself was bound to be interesting. You know, as you said, it's a test of wits. It's a test of resolve. Who could, you know, outpoint the opponent, not in the physical perspective, but the mental warfare as well. Now he's going to face someone of same caliber. You know, Alan Jouban, if I remember correctly, he has brown belt under Eddie Bravo. You know, one of the greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners on the planet at this point in Planet Jiu-Jitsu. So again, it's going to be the same, who's going to be better on the ground kind of a scenario, but both are wary of each other's skill set, so I could see this going even further on the feet. So this is one of the most interesting matchups because effectively, you know, John Kavanagh would know what Alan Jouban's strengths are and what his weaknesses are. So what SPG does, you know, we talked about the movement training with Ido Portal as well. So they have very, you know, an interesting way of laying out the game plan for their opponents. So I could see this probably not being the grappling exhibition that we might wanted
expected to be, yeah.
But rather, it might play out on the feet because both would be wary of the dangers that each other possess, either on the offensive or on the defensive. So it's a very interesting matchup, as you said. It's kind of like a chess match. It's aptly put.
Yeah.
It would be, to see who would be 1 or 2 steps ahead of the opponent's game plan. So yeah, it's a very fascinating fight. Probably, going. I see it going Gunnar Nelson's way just because of, he lost to 2 guys. One is Damian Maia, and the other is Rick Story. And Rick Story is very dynamic, very versatile as a striker. So that was Gunnar Nelson's biggest hole in his game at that point. So he obviously has evolved since then. But as I said, this makes for an interesting matchup. But I see Gunnar Nelson probably getting the victory.
I see Alan Jouban winning. I see Alan Jouban, either getting the decision victory or knocking him out.
Yeah, so as I said, at the end of the day, it's gonna come down to the game plan. Who has a better game plan of negating one's? I won't say submission because both would, it's a difficult question to answer because of the pedigree. That's why I see this going on the feet. Because if I were a grappler and if I knew that I was going up against an elite grappler, an elite jiu-jitsu artist, I would essentially take the fight to the feet. So it's, again, one of those interesting clash of styles where both have extensive background in jiu-jitsu. So this might not be the jiu-jitsu exhibition that we all expect. This might actually play out on the feet more.
Yeah, so let's see how that goes. That's the fight I'm waiting to see, though. Now, of course, the main event is Jimmy Manuwa versus Corey Anderson. Now, Jimmy Manuwa is 2-2 in his last 4. He has wins over OVP and Jan Blachowicz. He has losses to Anthony Johnson and Alexander Gustafsson. Now, what it seems like is the minute he's against one of the top 5 guys, he falters a bit.
Yeah, the last fight that we saw of Jimmy Manuwa against Owen St. Preux, that was, the way he knocked out Owen St. Preux was just phenomenal. I mean,
it was, but Owen St. Preux is not a really aggressive in-your-face guy. The minute he faces somebody a little more aggressive, like an Anthony Johnson or an Alexander Gustafsson, who also has a height. Of course, OVP is very tall and has a height. A little more aggressive than he is because they have similar games. They both go for the knockouts. Standing.
Yeah, and Manu also said, give me John Jones. So he's one of the guys that called out John Jones.
Yeah, but you don't think it's too I personally, this is just my personal thing. He's, like I said, he's got a 2-2 record in his last 4 fights. I don't think it's right to be calling out, John Jones just on the basis of that.
Right. So, the other thing is his 2 defeats, as I said, came against 2 other best strikers in the division at this point. You have Anthony Johnson and you have Gustafsson. So, yeah, I mean, both have fought for the title. Many felt Gustafsson won in his fight against John Jones.
So do I. I remember that fight. I felt he won. All you needed to do, of course, was see John Jones' face at the end of that fight. And look at Alexander Gustafsson. Alexander Gustafsson was brilliant in that fight, I thought.
Yeah, so, so losing to 2 other, contenders, 2 other title contenders might not be that big of, a setback for him. But just seeing his last fight where he essentially knocked Owen St. Preux on his feet. He just collapsed after the knockout. That kind of reminds everyone of the scary power that even Jimmy Manuwa possesses.
Yeah, I agree, but I'll be very frank with you. I wasn't very impressed with OVP that day. I don't really think Jimmy Manuwa won as much as OVP lost that fight.
Yeah, but now you look at Corey Anderson, for example, his record. Who are the big names that Anderson has fought?
Not really, because see, you look at him, he has a win over Sean O'Connell. Before that, a loss to Mauricio Ria, a win over Tom Lawler, and then a win over Fabio Maldonado. So he doesn't really have, a win over. So even if Jimmy Manuwa beats Corey Anderson, which I think he will, I I don't know if that's enough to again start calling out John Jones and asking for a title fight. You need to get through an Anthony Johnson, an Alexander Gustafsson, a Glover Teixeira, or a Daniel Cormier if he doesn't win against Anthony Johnson, you know, to finally want to get a John Jones fight. You need to beat one of these top 4 or 5 guys, you know, to be deserving of a title fight, I feel.
Yeah, but as I said, the light heavyweight division is so, you know, there aren't enough contenders at this point. You know,
well, what about Jimmy Manuwa versus Mauricio Shogun Rui after this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can turn back and have, if for example, if Jimmy Manuwa wins against Cody Anderson, who is the realistic next guy that you would want to, you know, put against Jimmy Manuwa? Because Manuwa looked very impressive in his last fight with Owen Senpru. Yeah, a big win over
like I said, according to me, OVP made him look good.
Yeah, so, you know, Senpru took John Jones to all 5 rounds. You know?
Yeah, but that was a rusty John Jones coming back after some time. It was a cautious John Jones.
It was, but again, you know, OSP, and I remember him putting in Von Flute show not too long ago, which was phenomenal. You know, that was the submission that many people were talking about. So Owen Senpru was a hot prospect. You know, it's not like he always underwhelms. He's more like Uriah Hall, where he showed a lot of promise and then just faded away. But, you know, again, so OSP is not an easy fight for anyone. You know, the manner in which Jimmy Manuwa dismantled him, just shut his striking game was very impressive. So, yeah, what you say makes sense. But, you know, what I see happening is, for example,
I always make sense.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to take a small little break before we get back to Akhilesh. And we're back. I think we were at Akhilesh was saying how he that I'm always right or something like that, right?
Yeah. So essentially, you know, we were talking about who Jimmy Manuwa should face if he you know, managed to win managed to win against Anderson convincingly. You know, you have the matchup between Gustafsson and Teixeira going down. You have Cormier and
Johnson.
Anthony Johnson going down. So the thing is, if Gustafsson wins, I think it would warrant a rematch between Jimmy Manuwa and Gustafsson, just because you know, he lost to Gustafsson some time ago. So you cannot throw these guys to the wolves. You know, your Daniel Cormiers, your John Jones, or your Anthony Johnsons. Anthony Johnson is on a mad streak right now. You know, he's knocking his opponents out left, right, and center. So I realistically think Johnson has a better chance of winning against Cormier, because after the fight, I remember every single fight that he has since, he has, you know, made a point by taking his opponents to the ground, whether it was Bader, and he showed great takedown defense as well, you know. So I think Anthony Johnson at this point is on a tear. He has a mission. He's on a mission. He has a thing to prove. So
he does, but I don't think it's that easy to write off. I mean, Daniel Cormier is not he's beaten Johnson and Gustafsson. You know, he's grinded them out, so he knows what he's going to be up against. He's seen Johnson fight against the other guys, so I'm sure he's going to have a game plan ready.
And he also took a hard, you know, shot from Johnson.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, Daniel Cormier, you know, he fought in the heavyweight division, did not lose. The only fight he lost to was against John Jones, so, you know, I'm not going to write him off. But again, Cormier is just getting older, while Johnson is just getting scarier. So that is one thing that, you know, I've
but that's what's going to make it such an exciting fight. You know, I think Daniel Cormier, again, you know, he's shown against even an Anderson Silva, against a Gustafsson, against a Johnson, that he knows what his strengths are and he plays to them.
Yeah. So again, you know, it could go either way. You know.
Anyway, that's a whole different discussion. We are talking about Jimmy Manuwa versus Cody Anderson, and we shifted on to Daniel Cormier and Anthony Johnson. But I think Jimmy Manuwa needs to beat, like, you know, a couple of more guys before, you know, at least one more guy before he wants one of these top 5 guys. Like I said, according to me, Mauricio Shogun, because he's on his way up, this guy's trying to get his way up. I think that would be an interesting matchup.
Yeah, I mean,
and since they're both fighting within a week of each other, you know, they'll both be fighting within a week of each other, unless Jimmy Manuwa gets really badly hurt or something. I think they'll both be ready to fight around the same time.
Yeah, I mean that could happen. As I said, I would want to build Shogun as as the next title contender. So I went with the easier, considerably easier route where I said Jared Cannonier and probably the winner of Gustafsson and Teixeira. But it also makes sense to, if for example Teixeira wins, then I would give Teixeira to Jimmy Manuwa and not Mauricio Shogun, because of the stylistic matchup that it brings. So there are interesting matchups in the light heavyweight division where people, even I think there are lack of contenders, but there are still some interesting fights.
Yeah.
Either ways it makes sense. I would probably throw Jimmy against Glover Teixeira, or maybe, as I said, against Shogun. Makes sense.
Yeah, well, let's see what happens with UFC Fight Night London. These are the 3 top fights according to us. The 3 interesting fights, but of course it's a full prelims and a full fight card, so it'll be let's see what the fight card throws up. But these are the fights to watch out for. And having said that, that is all from me, Parvin Dabas and Akhilesh Gannavarapu. Until we see you next time, thank you so much for logging in again. Thank you and goodbye.